This is TWiT.
And I'm going to British Columbia. Well, I'm already here.
I was going to say, it's not a big trip.
Not a big trip, no. And looking out my view and a little bit further north, I'd be able to see the home of this particular whiskey. This is Shelter Point, and Shelter Point is a chunk of coastland on Vancouver Island, east side, just south of Campbell River. And it's been a distillery only since about 2011. The fellow who started it, his name is Patrick Evans, and his multi-generational family on the island, an area called the Comox Valley, where they've been farmers. And so he was able to acquire land. It was already a farm, but it was one of the university experimental farms, about 300 hectares, pretty big. For that kind of property along the coastline around Shelter Point. And so he got that in 2005, started growing barley along with a bunch of other crops, very much an organic process, and decided that one of the things he could do with barley was make whiskey from it. And so recruited a buddy of his, a guy named James Marinus, who was also in farming, to lead a distillery. And they got some funding. They brought in Andrew Curry. Andrew Curry's father, Hal Curry, was the man who brought whiskey back to Arran, the Islay type island. That had last had a distillery on it like the 1800s. And in the 1990s, he brought a new distillery to Arran called the Arran Distillery. And so this is his son, and his son has been running Arran Distillery and some others. And so was part of sort of getting things up and rolling with them, including recruiting a fellow by the name of Mike Nicholson, who's a very famous master distiller, spanning 18 different distilleries, including Lagavulin, over his career, and had happened to retire to Vancouver Island. So they dragged him out of retirement, acquired a couple of pot stills from Forsyth, Scotland, the proper, low wines, high stills. They obviously grow their own barley, do their own malting. They're only the second Canadian single malt distillery in all of Canada, going back in 2011. There's more now. The first being in Nova Scotia, a place called Glenora, that had all kinds of interesting conflicts when they first started getting going, because they were using the term single malt. The Scots were pretty adamant about, no, that's us. And it's like, hey, I'm not calling it Scotch. I'm calling it Canadian whiskey, but using the single malt process. This is a very small operation. They make about 65,000 bottles a year, but they do sell into the US. So the particular edition I picked up, they have a few, is their Cask Strength Single Malt. So local barley, local water, no special treatments to this. Now, because it's a cask strength, what does that tell us? Has it ever had water added to it? Absolutely. The water was added to it when it came out of the still and was cut down to probably 63.5 before they put it into bourbon casks. It was aged for a certain amount of time. There's no appellation on this bottle, which tells us it's a low number, over 3 years, so they wouldn't call it whiskey. Not that they have to comply with those rules, because this is Canada, not Scotland, but you're pretty sure they do.
This is Canada.
Yeah, and they don't. There's no Scots hovering over them.
Canada,
and of course, right on the seaside. Like, one of the things about Shelter Point is very Scottish terrain. The salt in the air, cool breezes, cold winters. This is like Scotland, a great place to age a whiskey. And so here we go with, a color that without any additional coloring or chill filtration, which they've done neither to. Is probably
impressive. Yeah.
It's probably a 6 year, something like that.
Yeah. Looks good.
Got a fruity nose on it. Definitely, it is a cask strength, so it's going to poke you.
That's going to poke you.
It's going to poke you. Yeah. Now, I've never done this on the show before, but when you're drinking a cask strength, one of the things you can do is add a little water to it.
Right.
And so before the show started, I got a glass of water together with a teaspoon. I like to let the water sit. I'm just using tap water, nothing fancy here, but I let the water sit because we chlorinate our water here up on the coast. It's lake water, so it's very soft, but I want the chlorine to be gone. So let the water sit for an hour or so. It's all gone. And I'm just going to take a teaspoon of this water, and I'm just going to put a couple of drops in. There we go. And right away I could see, and it's probably not going to come across in the camera, but I could see where the water hit, because there's little threads that come off the water as the congeners interact with the water. So you really are changing the chemistry of this by adding a little water to it.
You don't need to much. You're not diluting it so much as just
Well, and what are we talking about? A couple of ounces there, an ounce and a half or so. I pour pretty heavy. So a few splashes is going to take it down a few points. It definitely took the harsh note off.
Yeah.
And I would say that's less to do with the alcohol and more to do with the breaking of some of the congeners. So we changed the chemistry in this.
Interesting. It's a chemistry experiment in a glass.
It absolutely is. And now I could add a little more. And now I'm trying to get more into the 40% range. So down to a regular spirit flavor. I don't want to go too far with that. And I've actually had some whiskeys where when I added water to it, they didn't get better. They got worse. So it's something to experiment with cask strengths, is giving him a few drops and then maybe giving a few more to see where you got to. But this is very warming. It's sort of a lighter. There's no peat in here at all. It's woody. It's got some wood strength to it. I want to finish out the story about Shelter Point with the fact that in 2022, Patrick Evans sold the majority of his stake in that distillery to an investment company, to Nelson Investments, which normally would make me sad. Right. But he wanted to focus on the farming side of things. So he still has a relationship with them. But then I went and investigated Nelson Investments because it's not Diageo, like it's nobody I'd heard of. And it turns out they're a local Vancouver Island investment group. They're literally a couple plus another couple who are directly related. It's Chris and Stephanie Nelson, and Stephanie's brother, Jason Gordon, and his wife, Jeannie. That's Nelson Investments. Born and raised on the island, although apparently Stephanie is from Prince Rupert, which is a little coastal town, central coast BC. And they have I think they were originally just a property portfolio investment company. They had a bunch of properties in Vancouver, but then they started investing on the island. And so they have a resort in Tofino, which is on the west coast. And they have a solar lighting company. And then they got into spirits marketing. They created a company called Beverage. Something they formed in 21. And in 22, they bought a majority stake in Shelter Point. So I really don't have I'm not sad. Like, that's kind of cool that a local investment group has increased the funding and sort of created the Kretsu effect by having that marketing company and things to take Shelter Point further. And that's one of the reasons I was happy to see they sell in the US, because often these small distilleries in other countries just don't get outside of the country. It's not a thing. And so part of this, I think, is by having a marketing company and some professional services around it, that they have been able to get into the US market. So we can all give it a try. That Cask Strength edition that I just was talking about $70 US, which is pricey. That's up there. That's a nice bourbon, a better quality bourbon, or a mid-size, 10-year-old Scottish whiskey will come in around that. So it's not a cheap whiskey by any stretch of the imagination, but you're buying a little BC there. You are the water that I'm looking at. Straight across from there is where Shelter Point would be. So not far from me.
Little BC in a bottle.
That's it.
BC in a bottle.
Now I want to drink it.
They've only been running for a decade, for 12, 13 years. So we're not going to see the age stuff for a while yet.
But you think it's worth getting the cask strength and just a little dribble of water in there.
Just taste the water in it. Yeah.
You're coming to Seattle soon. I would imagine you're going to bring stuff.
Oh, look at that. Listen to him beg. Listen to him beg.
I don't like to be that guy, but
I do the same thing.
I'm still trying to convince the boss to come with me, but I think we might pull that off. But are you saying, could I possibly have something unusual in my room?
I mean, you drive no idea what you're talking about. I don't know.
Yeah. I saw the Clonakilty. I love it. It's very good. So.
Yeah. I think we had a pretty nice meal last time we were together in Seattle, and ended up convincing them to open up the cellar and pull a couple of very unusual whiskeys out.
I was able to remain upright for longer than I should have.
Because you only needed to make it upstairs. We were already in the Regency. Right?
Yeah.
Like you only have to stumble this far.
I'm surprised I wasn't like just pushed out of the elevator like trash.
I wouldn't have trusted us to get in a taxi that night. We didn't need to.
Yeah, it was not good. I mean, it was great, but
Yeah, there was definitely a moment that you said this. He's like, "What is happening?" It's like I'm negotiating.
Is this real life?
No,
this is what happens. You haven't seen someone in a while. It's exciting.
And then I connect with a good whiskey guy.
And we had that incredible, that night in Daniels. Which is just
and Daniels it was a rodeo. It made 2 Windows Weekly episodes, right? We talked about the Cellar Edition Maker's Mark and the Purple Topped Willet, which were both a great drink. A good enough. I haven't bought those bottles.
You'll be shocked to know I find myself in a liquor store on a fairly regular basis, and every time I see the top of a Maker's Mark bottle, I smile. And and I think of that.
The wax tip.
I think of the wax.
We had a very special bottle that night. You don't usually get a chance to taste those.
Nice.